VFR NAVLOGs can take forever to fill out. In fact, when I got my private pilot certificate, I spent nearly 4 hours building a NAVLOG for my check ride. Because of that, I created this totally free automatic VFR NAVLOG that'll save you hours of flight planning. And in this video, I'll show you how to use it. Welcome to Free Pilot Training, I'm Josh, and today I'm showing you how to use my automatic VFR NAVLOG. And you can get this completely free from freepilottraining.net. Now, before I show you how to use this guy, I do want to point out one other cool thing about this is that it actually fits on a knee board, because most other NAVLOGs out there, like the one put out by Jeppesen, doesn't actually do that. Because of that, you have to deal with a giant piece of paper like this in flight, which can be super annoying in your training aircraft. Keep in mind, this document is a Microsoft Excel sheet, so if you don't have Excel, you'll have to pay the piper and make Bill Gates even richer before you can use this guy. I promise it's worth it though. Anyway, when you first open this guy up, you'll notice that there are a few different tabs in here. This NAVLOG tab is the tab you will be using to create your NAVLOG. I've got some basic instructions in this tab if you need those. Then I've got a tab for the formulas that are used in this Excel sheet as well. My friend Seth Lake, who's an examiner, told me that if you want to use this product on the check ride, you can do that. But if you do, he's going to ask you where some of these calculations came from. So this is where you can find that information if you need it. Then we have the example tab, and this is actually the finished product from the NAVLOG I'm building in this video. So if you need something to look at, you can come over to this tab and see how I filled mine out. Now, before I get started filling this guy out, you're going to notice that I color-coded a few things for you. The blue areas are things that must be filled out, and then the white cells are things that will automatically be calculated for you. There are a few white cells that'll be empty. Some of these are for your personal notes. I know a lot of pilots like a spot for their radio frequencies, so I threw a couple cells up here for those, and then the rest of the blank spaces down here are for your in-flight calculations. Now, if you're wondering what these peach cells indicate, these are cells you should calculate if you have time, but the automatic calculations provided will get you really close. For example, your expected calibrated airspeed should be really calculated with a flight computer. But these cells will estimate your calibrated airspeed based on the assumption that true airspeed increases 2% every 1,000 feet of altitude increase. This isn't a perfect calculation, but it's pretty close when you're operating at a lower altitude. Okay, before we start filling this guy out, we need to plot our course, so let's go ahead and do that really quick. Today, I'm going to be flying from Joplin Regional, which is KJLN, over to Floyd Jones, which is in Lebanon, Missouri. That's KLBO. So I'll start by drawing a line between these two airfields. This is what we call plotting our course, and after I do that, I'll use my plotter to determine my true course for this entire trip. I'm getting a true course of 071 or 71 degrees. Now, because this route is a straight line the whole way, I can just throw that in my NAVLOG here. And I'll just put it up here on the first waypoint for now though, because I don't know how many waypoints I have yet. Next, I'll pick some VFR waypoints that are roughly 20 miles apart. Your first point should be at least 20 miles out, but the rest of them can be anywhere from 10 to 30 miles apart. Now, sometimes you do fly through areas that don't have a lot of good landmarks, so you'll just have to work with what you have. Let's see, these windmills are really easy to see from the air, so I'll pick this first windmill as my first waypoint. Then I'll take a quick measurement with my plotter. I'm showing that this leg is 20 miles, so I'll write that here on my map. Next, we have this major highway right here, Highway 160. This looks like a good option since there's a big Y to the north and a huge bend to the south. We should be able to see this guy pretty easily. All right, I'll pull out the plotter again. I'm showing 21 miles on this leg, so I'll write that down. Actually, this divided highway over here looks like another good waypoint. The chart says that there's a big speedway that you can see off to the north as well, so let's go ahead and mark this point. I'm showing 17 miles on this leg. Let's see if I can find one that's not a highway this time. How about this airport to the north of our course here? Looks like Buffalo Municipal Airport, and somewhere right here will be a beam this guy. Okay, so I'll measure this leg, and I'm getting 16 miles on this one. Then I think that should put us close enough to the airport. Let's see, I'm measuring it at 19 miles on this leg. And one final thing I like to do is to measure the total distance of our trip. I'm getting 93 miles here, so I'll go ahead and throw that in the NAVLOG at the top of the distance column. Now we have a starting point. Let's go over to our NAVLOG and get started. All right, so our first waypoint is Joplin, so I'll throw that in here. We'll skip this top of climb block for now though. You could change this if you needed to climb later or something, but this is typically the way you'll fill this out. Okay, then we have our first windmill, Highway 160, then the divided highway with the speedway, and then the Buffalo Airport to the left, of course. Then the last waypoint is going to be our final destination of Lebanon. But before we put this down here, I like to put one more point in here called the top of descent. I'll explain that more in a minute, but before I do, let's throw in our destination in here and do a few other things. Okay, now we know how many waypoints we have, so we can go ahead and throw our true course of 071 in here for all these legs now. Next, let's go ahead and throw in our leg distances here. Now, we don't know our climb distance yet, so don't mess with this cell. We'll get that in a minute. But I know my first leg is 20 miles, my second leg is 21, the next one is 17, then we have 16, and then our last leg is 19 miles. So I'll go ahead and throw that in here. Keep in mind, we don't know our top of descent yet, so we'll just skip that for now. Now, this sheet adds up these individual distances for you and puts the total down here at the bottom of the sheet. So if you're off by more than a mile or two, you might want to remeasure your legs. Now, before I move on, I do want to point out that this spreadsheet does have a place for VOR radials and frequencies if you want to use a VOR for one of your waypoints. In fact, if we pull out our map, you can see that our divided highway could be replaced by the 353 radial off of the Springfield Vortac. So I'll go ahead and throw that frequency of 116.9er in here, and my 353 radial up here in case I want to test out my VOR skills during this flight. Next, let's grab our performance calculations. Up here at the top of the pre-flight side of our NAVLOG, we've got some blue cells we need to fill in. First, we need the elevation of our takeoff field. According to our chart, it's 978 feet MSL. So let's throw that in here. Next, we have the altimeter setting at our takeoff field. Let's say we're making this trip as soon as we're done here. In that case, I'll just grab the METAR from aviationweather.gov. It looks like our altimeter setting is 29er, so I'll throw that in right here. Then the elevation at our destination is 1,321 feet. So we'll jump back over to the NAVLOG and throw that in here. The current altimeter setting at LBO is 29er, so we'll throw that in here. And now that we've done that, our spreadsheet has calculated the pressure altitude at both locations. Now we need to decide something. At what altitude do we want to fly? Anytime we fly above 3,000 feet AGL, we need to fly the proper VFR altitude. If we're flying a magnetic course of 360 to 179, we're on the east side of the compass, we need to fly an odd altitude plus 500 feet. If we're flying a mag course of 180 to 359 or the west side of the compass, then we need to fly an even altitude plus 500 feet. I like to tell people that northeast is odd and southwest is even. So you've got neodd and sweven. And if you're enjoying this video, it'd be pretty sweven of you to smash that like button. Anyway, on this trip, we're flying east, so we need to use neodd. So a good odd altitude is 5,500 feet MSL. So I'll go ahead and pick that and throw that over here in my cruise altitude on the pre-flight side of my NAVLOG. Now that we know our cruise altitude, let's grab our wind data. This Winds Aloft chart comes from aviationweather.gov, and if you use it, you have to make sure you're using the closest sensor to your route of flight. Thankfully for this trip, Springfield is right in the middle of these two airfields. So I'll just find SGF on the chart here and grab the wind data for the 6,000 foot column since it's the closest to our cruise altitude of 5,500 feet. Looks like our cruise winds are 220 at 41 with a temperature at altitude of 14 degrees Celsius. And now that we know that, we can come over to our spreadsheet and throw these winds and temps into our blue wind blocks. Now to make things a little more accurate, I'm just going to throw these in the cruise legs for now and not the climb and descent leg. Once that's done, I like to go back to the Winds Aloft chart and pick a wind column that's about half our cruise altitude for the climb and descent legs. Let's see, at 3,000 feet MSL, we've got winds that are 190 at 29, and the 3,000 foot column doesn't give us temperatures, so we'll just assume that the temperature is the same as the surface to make things easier. We could calculate it, but it's not going to make much difference for this situation. Now let's get the rest of the performance information, and to fill out this section, we need the Pilot's Operating Handbook for our airplane, or the POH. If your airplane doesn't have one of those, then you need the Airplane Flight Manual. Today, I'll be flying a Cessna 172 Sierra, so these charts might look a little bit different than the plane you're in, but this NAVLOG should still work for you. On newer POHs, the performance information is going to be in section 5, but for older airplanes, who knows? It's going to be wherever the manufacturer felt like putting it. Let's start out with our climb data. For NAVLOG purposes, you want to find the chart labeled time, fuel, and distance to climb. Some POHs give you charts at different weights, but this one only gives you the climb data at your maximum weight. So these numbers are actually going to be slightly off, but they're conservative. Now this chart is a little bit weird. To properly calculate climb data, we need to know the pressure altitude for the altitude we're going to be cruising at, not the actual cruising altitude. Now normally you'd have to calculate this, but because we put our cruise altitude and altimeter setting into the pre-flight side of our NAVLOG, my spreadsheet has already calculated this for us. It looks like our pressure altitude at cruise is going to be 5,470 feet. If we look back at our chart, you can see that we've got data for a 5,000 foot and a 6,000 foot pressure altitude. And you could interpolate this data, but I'm just going to round down to 5,000 feet for today. So it looks like we're going to be climbing at 73 knots indicated airspeed, and we'll be climbing at a rate of 550 feet per minute. So let's come back over to our NAVLOG and throw that information in up here. Now, before we fill in the time and fuel information, I want to show you something. Unfortunately, the climb information in these lines over here is for a climb from sea level up to our pressure altitude. A lot of people will just use this information in this line, but what I like to do is I like to take the information from my cruise altitude and subtract the information from this pressure altitude at my takeoff field. Let's see here. Our NAVLOG calculated that at 1,008 feet. So let's go back over to our climb chart. From sea level to 5,000 feet, it would take us 8 minutes, but we started at a pressure altitude of 1,000 feet, so we basically saved 1 minute in the climb. So our total climb time should be 7 minutes. Let's go ahead and throw that in a NAVLOG over here. Now, one thing I do want to mention is that Microsoft products are extremely stupid. For some reason, the only way I can get this cell to take the correct time is to input the time in an hour, minute, and second format. So let's type in 000700 into this cell. Now let's grab our fuel. I'm showing 1.9 gallons for the climb up to 5,000 feet, and we saved 0.4 by starting out at 1,000 feet, so let's call our climb fuel 1.5 gallons. And we'll go ahead and throw that into our Excel sheet over here. In case you didn't already know this, you actually burn quite a bit of fuel when you start the engine, when you taxi, and also during the takeoff. 1.5 gallons is pretty conservative for most trainer planes, but a lot of POHs will actually give you a start, taxi, and takeoff fuel. Looks like for this plane, it's 1.4 gallons, so let's go ahead and adjust this number real quick. Now this chart does give you a distance to climb, but this distance assumes zero wind. So this chart isn't really accurate if there's any wind at all. If you wanted to find your zero wind climb distance, you could subtract this information in the takeoff pressure altitude from the information in the cruise pressure altitude to get a rough estimate. But don't worry about doing that because this NAVLOG takes the wind and calculates the distance for you. I don't have a block up here for that. It automatically populates this white distance cell down here on the flight side of the NAVLOG. And actually, now that we know our climb distance, we can go ahead and subtract that distance from the distance we measured on the first leg. That way we can get our distances back where they need to be because our climb distance is on the way to our first waypoint. Let's see, 20 minus 11 is 9. So I'll throw that in here from our top of climb to the windmill. Next, let's grab the cruise data. And once again, in newer POHs, that's going to be in section 5. Just like the climb chart, this chart uses our pressure altitude, which we know is 5,470 feet. So let's just use a 6,000 foot chart today. We could interpolate, but I'm feeling lazy. Now, to make your aircraft engine last as long as possible, it's best to keep the power below 75% during cruise. So let's pick something below 75% basic horsepower. But this is where things can get a little bit confusing. As you can see, we have 3 different temperature ranges. We know our temperature at cruise is going to be 14 degrees Celsius because we put that in our NAVLOG when we got the Winds Aloft. You probably already know that standard temperature is 15 degrees Celsius, but 15 is not actually standard at 5,500 feet. The temperature drops 2 degrees Celsius every 1,000 feet, so standard temperature up here is going to be closer to 4 or 5 degrees. We're still pretty close to standard temperature at 14 degrees though, so I'm going to go ahead and use this block. It looks like 2,500 RPM keeps us below 75% basic horsepower, and we still seem to be getting a pretty decent cruise speed of 114 knots true. So let's use this information here. And it looks like we're going to be burning exactly 9 gallons per hour if we use this setting. Okay, so let's go back over to the pre-flight side of our NAVLOG and throw in 2,500 RPM. our basic horsepower of 65%, and our true airspeed of 114 knots. And then we'll throw in our fuel burn of 9 gallons per hour. Now, before we're done with the fuel, make sure you update the usable fuel over here on the flight side of your NAVLOG. This plane has a usable fuel capacity of 53 gallons, and this needs to be accurate so our NAVLOG can calculate everything properly. All right, let's go back and find a few more numbers. Next, we need to find our variation and our deviation. To find the variation, we need to look back at our chart to see which lines of variation are running through our course. For the entire course, I'm only seeing one line of variation. It's right by our second point, and it's showing 1 degree east. Now, most of you remember the old saying, east is least and west is best. This is an easy way for you to remember whether you should add or subtract the variation. But if you come over to the spreadsheet, you'll notice that I make it dummy-proof by telling what you need to do at the top of the block. Minus or subtract east and add west. Okay, so I had 1 degree east, so let's throw a -1 in all these cells. To find the deviation, you need the compass correction card from your airplane. If you don't have it or you don't know where it is, you can leave this at 0 and you know your course is going to be off a couple degrees. But if you know your compass corrections, I'll show you how to use it really quick. Now to use this, we need to know our magnetic heading, which our NAVLOG has already calculated for us. This first leg is a heading of 089, and then we've got a few at 081, and then one at 083. Typically, this little guy is going to be attached to your magnetic compass in some way. If it's not, that's a whole nother issue. But anyway, if you look at this deviation card from my airplane, what you'll notice is that we kind of just have to pick the closest heading to the course. And unfortunately, we have to do a little bit of math. So go ahead and start taking your shoes off. 090 is the closest heading to the headings on our NAVLOG. And this thing just says that we need to steer a 092 to correct for deviation. So we just need to add 2 degrees to all our magnetic headings to get a final course heading. Okay. So let's jump over to the NAVLOG and throw 2 degrees into all of these cells. If you needed to subtract, you could just put a negative in front of the number. Now that this is done, our NAVLOG has automatically calculated our course heading. And this is duplicated over here on the flight side of your sheet because this is actually what you're going to be using during flight. Looks like we'll be starting with a 091 heading, and then we'll end up on a 083 heading after the climb. Then, if you know your takeoff time, you can throw that in here if you want. I don't prefer using clock times in flight, but some people do, so that's there if you want it. Now, a lot of NAVLOGs don't include descent data, but mine does, so let me show you how to use that real quick if you want to. For this, you're just going to be inputting your personal preferences. My spreadsheet says that I'm going to be cruising at an indicated airspeed of about 101 knots. So I think I'm going to descend with power, and I'll plan on speeding up to 120 for the descent at a rate of 1,000 feet per minute. According to my spreadsheet, if I do this, it will take me 3.2 minutes to descend, and I can do it in about 6.4 miles. Let's round down to 6, and we'll throw that over on the flight side of the NAVLOG. Let's see, it'll take me 6 miles to descend, so I'll subtract 6 from 19 to get 13 on the previous leg up here. And if I did everything right, my distances should zero out. Now, back over here on the pre-flight side of my sheet, you might be wondering what this altitude loss block is telling us. This is just letting you know how much altitude you need to lose to get down to pattern altitude. This can be really handy if you have a long descent. Once again, I want to mention these peach cells. If you have time, go ahead and use a flight computer to get these calibrated airspeeds if you want. You might also want to calculate your true airspeed during the climb if you need things to be even more precise. At this point, our NAVLOG is basically done, but before we use it, let's go ahead and clean it up a little bit so it's easier to read in flight. I'll throw my N number in here, maybe a few notes, and then I'll throw in my frequencies. And once I'm done with all that, I'm going to clean up the bottom of my NAVLOG on the flight side. I don't really care about the pre-flight side. I'm not going to be using that in flight. But to clean up this flight side, I can just turn all these unused cells white and make the words white as well. You can even do that over here if you want, but that's all you need to do. Now I'll just print it out and I'll show you guys what the completed product looks like. Okay, now that I've got this guy printed out, let's just fold it over like so, and it's basically ready to use. And then we could just throw it on our kneeboard and use it in flight. And I'll explain how to do that just really briefly. First of all, timing is key here. If you forget to start your clock on takeoff, you're basically screwing yourself over when you do this. So don't forget to hack the clock. Now, after you take off, do all the things you normally would do. Normally, you're going to fly straight ahead for a couple of miles before you can turn on course. I like to estimate about 2 to 5 miles, depending on what type of airfield I'm operating at. But to get yourself on your course, you need to do something. I like to tell students that they need to pick out some kind of waypoint to fly over before they can start flying their course headings. Well, looky there. There's a nice big town I can fly right next to on this map. In fact, it's exactly 9 miles from my airport. So if I drive out 2 miles and then turn towards that town, I'm going to be at my cruise altitude right there because it's supposed to take me 11 miles to get up to cruise. That's why I like to mark the top of climb on my chart. It makes things kind of handy. Now, when you hit your cruise altitude, you can go ahead and throw in your times and stuff in here, and then you can calculate your ground speed if you want. But I've found that the climb isn't always super accurate for ground speed calculations because we don't always know how a towered airport is going to have you depart the pattern. But I'll go ahead and throw in my time in here when I reach my cruise. Let's say it took me 8 minutes to get to my cruise altitude. In that case, I'll throw that in here. My leg time for this one is going to be the same as my total time. So I'll put this in here as well. And let's see. If I'm burning 9 gallons per hour, I could pull out my flight computer if I want. But the easier thing to do is to look up here in this cell and see that I'm burning 0.15 gallons per minute. That number is automatically calculated by the NAVLOG from 9 gallons per hour. So I can just take that number and multiply it times 8 to get a total of 1.2 gallons. And if we added our start, taxi, and takeoff fuel to this, that would put us at 2.6 gallons. So I'll throw that in over here. I know it doesn't do us much good, but let's go ahead and calculate the ground speed for the climb. For this, let's just stick to our climb distance of 11 miles. This isn't going to be super accurate during the climb unless you're climbing straight out the entire time, but it should be fairly close. Let's see, if we travel 11 miles in 8 minutes, we can divide 11 miles by 8 minutes to get a ground speed of 1.375 nautical miles per minute. Then you can multiply that times 60 to get a ground speed of roughly 83 knots. So let's go ahead and put that in our NAVLOG. Throughout your flight, you're going to be doing this with every leg. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to figure out time, distance, and fuel. And fuel is the most important thing here. Do we have enough fuel to reach our destination? Let's say I just passed my divided highway with the speedway on the left. So far this trip has taken us over 33 minutes when it should have taken just over 26. Do we have enough fuel? According to my pre-flight planning, I should have 47.2 gallons of fuel remaining. But based on my in-flight calculations, I have 47.4. And I know this isn't really a big difference, but you should always be double checking to make sure you're going to make it. According to our log, we have 35 miles remaining on our trip. So if I calculate my ground speed at 145 knots, and I convert that to nautical miles per minute by dividing 145 knots by 60, I can then divide my distance by my ground speed of 2.4 nautical miles per minute to figure out that I have 14.6 minutes to go. At 0.15 gallons per minute, that puts us at 2.2 gallons needed to reach our destination. So if I subtract that from my current fuel on board, you can see that we're going to be just fine when we land. And we'll even have the proper 30 minutes of fuel reserves. Now, one of the things that's kind of cool is the descent information that this NAVLOG gives you. Now, we know that we should be descending 6 miles out. I like to throw that on my chart as well so I can see where to start the descent. If I start my descent right here 6 miles out, then I'm going to be right at my pattern altitude when I get there. And I know that's not a huge deal when you're descending from such a low altitude, but descent planning is really important when you start descending from really high altitudes. And that's how you use my automatic VFR NAVLOG. I hope you enjoyed this video. Once again, this product is completely free over at freepilottraining.net. And by the way, if you need an endorsement for the written exam, be sure to check out my premium private pilot ground course while you're over there. It may very well be the cheapest ground course out there, and I know you'll love it. Thanks for watching. See ya.